We continue with the Jesus Project as we face our demons for the month of January. We had originally a Luke 5 story about a leper, many stories in the Scripture about lepers. We've added one from Luke 17, a story about 10 lepers. 10 lepers that were healed by Jesus, and only one returned to give thanks. The power of what happened to him, not only receiving the healing, but the power and wonder of being with Jesus face to face, and the double blessing by simply returning to acknowledge the gift that he received and the one who gave it. Oh, my friends, may we be so thankful and may we be so open to the wonder and beauty of all God offers us as we move through and beyond facing our demons.
My name is Joram. I've lived in Samaria my whole life. I have a good wife, a son, and a daughter. I provided for my family by making pottery. It was in my working that I first noticed it. Numbness in my hands, followed by swollen patches on my skin. I couldn't believe it, so I just ignored it at first. But when my lips began to puff out and get sore and scaly, I knew I couldn't deny it any longer. I had the most dreaded sickness of my day, leprosy. I had hidden my hands from my wife for a while, but now I couldn't hide its effects on my face. When she noticed the swelling for the first time, she gasped. She knew right away what it was and what it was going to mean for our family. We both cried, and through our tears, we begged God for His mercy. I had no choice. No one really knew what caused leprosy, but everyone knew that it could be transferred between people. I had to leave my home and give up my work. My wife would have to try and support our family by making pottery and baking bread to sell. I've heard of lepers' families who have had to resort to begging to survive. The fate of a leper is not only grim in his body, but in the loss of dignity as well. Early in the illness, most lepers try and conceal their symptoms and beg for alms. I was no exception, but I could only hide the symptoms for so long. As soon as people realized that I was leprous, they would no longer give, but would hurry away, sometimes throwing rocks at me to keep me at a distance. I remember when I was afraid of lepers. By law, I had to announce with a loud voice that I was unclean, unclean. I knew my next step was to go to a gloomy place, the lepers' colony. There, those stricken with the disease could help support each other. The colony was located on the border between Galilee and Samaria. Its residents included Jews, Samaritans, and even some Gentiles. The brotherhood of illness made our differences meaningless. Everyone was equal in the colony. While I was there, I came to be friends with a group of men. All of them were Jews except for me. Sometimes we would go into the closest village together to seek food. There were a few compassionate townspeople who would leave food scraps in a designated place that only my friends and I knew about. One of the helpful townsfolk was an elderly woman named Naomi. Her husband had died from leprosy. She sometimes would watch for us to arrive at the food place and call out to us from a distance. She would always speak an encouraging word to us and tell us to keep faith in God. Hope in God sometimes ran as thin as our ragged clothing in the lepers' colony. One day when we went into the village, there seemed to be a stir. We arrived at the food spot, and Naomi had been waiting for us. She hurried to meet us, calling out, "Come as quickly as you can. We have heard that he is coming down the road toward our village." "Who?" we asked. "The young rabbi from Nazareth, Jesus." That name had been circulating among the colony residents for some time. We had heard that he was a great teacher. More recently, we had heard that he was a man of miracles. Some had even begun to suggest that he might be the Messiah. We were all a bit skeptical, but Naomi urged us to come. She said, "I have a friend who had completely gone deaf. She went to Jesus just last week and her hearing was restored. God is with this man. Please come now." We had learned to trust Naomi, and because of her witness, we were persuaded not only to go, but with hope in our hearts. I could only hope he wouldn't reject a Samaritan. We found Jesus near the edge of the village. Several townspeople had already gathered around him. We drew as close as we dared and called out to him, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." He heard our plea. He looked away from the people around him and said to us, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." That is all he said. That's it, we thought. But nothing had happened. He didn't touch us. He didn't tell us we were healed. We murmured among ourselves for a minute. "Maybe we should just do as he says," I said to my colleagues. As I turned and started back down the road into the village, slowly the others began following me. We had walked only a short distance when I turned to see if all of my group was coming behind me. I stopped suddenly and stared wide-eyed and open-mouthed at my friends. Their faces, their hands, the sores, swollen places, and disfigurements were gone. They were all clean. They began to look back at me with the same amazement. I was clean too. Me, a Samaritan. I guess we were all equal in God's grace. Oh, we laughed aloud, we cried, and we started off again into the village. Some wanted to go straight home. Others of us wanted to go find the priests. Now we knew why Jesus had told us to go to the priests. Jesus? Jesus! I turned back around quickly and saw Jesus and the others watching us. I hurried back toward Jesus. As I did, a psalm burst forth from me. "Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good. His mercy endures forever." I fell on my knees before Jesus and looked up at him. He was still watching my group, yet there was a look of disappointment on his face. He said, "Where are your friends? Weren't there 10 of you?" I looked back to see that they had all continued into the village. I was the only one who had come back. He said to the townspeople gathered around him, most of whom were Jews, "Could no one come back and give praise to God except for this foreigner?" I felt a little sheepish when he said that. But then I looked up at Jesus and said, Master, look, look." He looked at my clean hand and then took it in his hand. It was the first time I had felt the warmth of a human touch in so long. Then he looked at my face. I said, "Thank you. Thank you for healing my friends. Thank you for healing me. I thank God for you." Just then the pain in his face melted into the biggest, brightest smile I've ever seen. He tightened his grip on my hand and placed the other hand on the side of my face. He raised me up off my knees and pulled me in close to himself and looked straight into my eyes. He seemed to be looking deeper, as if into my very soul. And he said to me, "Thank you for your faith. It has made you well. Now go and show yourself to the priests, and then go home and see your wife and children." He smiled again, squeezed my hand, and then rejoined his followers. I looked back over my shoulder. I could barely see my friends who were still moving away, leaping and skipping with joy. I wanted to call out to them to come back, but they were too far away. Jesus and his followers became surrounded by the townspeople as they headed into the village. One stayed behind. It was Naomi. She had seen what had happened. She actually embraced me, and I thanked her for helping us to not miss Jesus. She went to catch up with the villagers to see what else he might do. Even though I couldn't wait to see my family, I just stood there watching Jesus until I could see him no more. I knew I would have to return soon to the lepers' colony as a witness, much like Naomi had been for us. I will never forget that day. I'll never forget what it was like to be touched by the power of God. I'll never forget what it felt like to realize that God was in Jesus. But I think I will remember most of all the expression on his face when I simply said, "Thank you."